All right, so you're a developer, and you need to get a handle on Flask, like right now.
Yeah, got to get up to speed quickly.
Exactly, and we're here to help you do just that.
Absolutely. And we're going right to the source, pulling straight from Flask's own documentation.
Yep, no fluff,
Yeah.
just the essentials. We're aiming for a solid understanding of Flask's core features.
All in about 10 minutes.
That's the goal. Okay, so Flask is famous for its simplicity.
Yeah, but don't let that fool ya. There's a lot going on under the hood.
Like with that classic Hello World
Yeah,
example, right?
exactly. I mean, it looks simple, but it reveals a lot about how Flask works.
Yeah, it's like a sneak peek behind the scenes.
Totally. So first, you import the Flask class.
Okay.
Then you got to create an instance of it. That's what we call your WSGI application. It handles the interface between the web server and your app.
Right, makes sense.
And then the magic happens with the route decorator.
Yeah, the route decorator.
Yeah, this little guy maps a URL to a specific function in your code. So when someone visits that URL,
Flask knows exactly what code to run.
exactly, to generate the response.
So even in that super simple Hello World example, we're seeing how Flask handles routing, sets up that WSGI application. I can see why developers love how elegant this framework is.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, but before we go any deeper,
Sure.
let's take a step back for a sec. How would a developer actually set up a brand new Flask project, like from scratch?
Okay, good question. Well, first things first, you got to pick a name for your application.
Right.
But whatever you do, don't name it flask.py.
Oh, why is that?
That's just asking for trouble. You'll run into all sorts of conflicts.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then you can use the Flask command to actually run your app.
So simple.
Yep, it fires up this built-in development server, perfect for testing and making tweaks as you build.
Ah, so the Flask command doesn't just run the app.
Nope.
It also sets up that communication between the server and our app through WSGI.
Right, you got it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, you mentioned naming the project Flask.py would cause problems.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Can you explain a bit more why that is?
Yeah, so imagine you're trying to import the Flask library, right? But your project itself is called flask.py. It creates this circular conflict.
I see.
You end up importing yourself, and it just messes everything up.
Yeah, that would definitely be a headache.
Speaking of things that can cause headaches, let's talk about debugging.
Ooh, yeah. Debugging.
Flask's got this built-in debugger that's an absolute lifesaver.
Every developer's best friend.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
So when you switch on debug mode, Flask automatically reloads the server every time you change your code.
So no more restarting manually every time I make a tweak.
Exactly. Way less hassle, right? And get this, you get an interactive debugger right there in your browser.
In the browser,
Yep. So if there's an error,
you can like step through the code, see what's going on.
yep, you can inspect variables, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, wow, that's super useful.
It's like having X-ray vision into your application.
Right. No more print statements all over the place.
Exactly. So much cleaner, right?
Yeah. But there's got to be a catch.
Well, yeah, there is one big one.
Okay, let's hear it.
Never, ever run the debugger in a production environment.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense.
It's a huge security risk.
Okay, so keep the debugger for development and testing.
Exactly. Keep it safe and sound.
Makes sense. All right, so we've got our app running. We know how to debug effectively.
Check and check.
But what about structuring our app, like the different pages and sections? I'm guessing this is where routing comes in.
You got it. Routing is all about creating those nice, clean URLs.
That users love and that search engines love.
Yes, exactly. It's like drawing a map for your web app.
So we're defining which functions handle which URLs.
Precisely. And Flask gives you a ton of flexibility here.
Okay, like what?
Well, you can use dynamic URLs, for example.
Dynamic URLs, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. It means you can create patterns instead of needing a separate route for every single page.
Ah, I see.
Much more efficient, right?
Absolutely. Can you give me an example, like in a real-world app?
Sure, let's say you're building an e-commerce site. You wouldn't want a separate route for every single product page.
No way, that'd be a nightmare.
Exactly. So instead, you could use a dynamic URL like product producted,
I see.
and Flask can handle any product page based on that unique ID.
So with one route, I can manage like thousands of products.
Exactly. Way easier, right?
That's genius. And URL helps with this too, right?
Oh, absolutely. URL is key.
It lets you generate URLs for specific functions in your app.
Yep. Keeps everything consistent and readable.
And it helps with SEO.
Oh, for sure. Clean URLs make Google happy.
Got to keep Google happy. All right, so we've covered routing, which is how we guide users and search engines
Right.
through our app.
Like a roadmap.
But what happens when users actually interact with the app? Like when they submit forms, upload files, send data our way.
That's where request handling comes in.
Okay, tell me more.
Flask provides this global request object, and it
Yeah.
contains all the information about the incoming request.
Form data, URL parameters, headers.
All of that. Even cookies.
So it's like a central hub for everything the user sends to the app.
Exactly. One-stop shop for user data.
Okay, but wait, what about multi-threading? Like if lots of users are accessing the app at the same time,
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
wouldn't that cause conflicts with a global object?
You'd think so, right? But Flask has this clever solution.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It uses something called context locals.
Context locals.
Yeah, so basically each thread handling a request.
Gets its own copy of the request object.
Exactly. It's like each thread gets its own little sandbox.
So no data mix-ups, even with multiple users.
Nope. Everything stays organized.
Context locals. That's a really neat trick.
It's a lifesaver.
Flask is full of elegant solutions. Okay, so we can access all this user data, but what do we do with it then? Do we have to manually write all the HTML for our responses?
Oh, no. Flask wouldn't make you do that.
Phew. That's where Jinja 2 templates come in.
Jinja 2.
Yeah, it's a powerful templating engine.
Lets you create dynamic HTML or other text-based formats really easily.
Dynamic HTML, so it's not just static content.
Right, you can embed variables and expressions, and Jinja takes care of rendering the final output.
Ah, so it's like we're building a blueprint with Jinja.
I like that analogy, yeah.
And Flask fills in the blanks with the dynamic content.
Based on the user's request and the application's logic.
Precisely. So Jinja handles all the HTML stuff.
Exactly, and here's the best part. It automatically escapes HTML.
Oh, so we don't have to worry about those nasty cross-site scripting attacks.
Nope. Security's baked right in.
Okay, that makes me feel much better about using templates. So we've got routing, request handling, dynamic templates.
Looking good so far.
But there's still one thing we haven't talked about.
What's that?
How do we keep track of user information between requests?
Good question. That's where sessions come in.
Sessions. Right, I've heard of those.
Yeah, so Flask gives you a secure way to store user-specific data.
So like if someone logs in.
Exactly. We need to remember that on other pages.
So how does it work?
Well, sessions are usually implemented using cookies.
Cookies, those little text files.
Yep. And here's the key. Flask signs these cookies cryptographically.
Cryptographically, so they can't be tampered with.
Exactly. Even if a user can see the cookie, they can't change the data inside.
Unless they know our secret key.
Precisely. So it's pretty secure.
That's reassuring.
Huh.
Okay, so we've got sessions. We keep track of users.
Right.
But what about giving feedback to users? Like, if they submit a form, how do we let them know if it was successful? Or if there were errors?
Flask has you covered there too.
Okay, good.
With its message flashing system.
Message flashing.
Yeah. It's a simple but effective way to show messages to the user.
Like on the next page after they do something.
Exactly. Whether it's a success message, a warning, or an error.
Okay, so it's all about creating a more user-friendly experience.
Exactly. You got to keep those users informed.
I like it, message flashing. I'm liking this Flask thing more and more.
It's pretty slick, right?
We've covered so much. Routing, request handling, templates, sessions, even giving feedback to users.
And we're just getting started.
Oh, there's more.
Oh, yeah, there's a whole lot more to discover.
Like what?
Well, Flask's real power comes from its extensibility.
Extensibility. So there's like extra stuff we can add.
Oh, yeah. A whole world of Flask extensions out there just waiting to supercharge your apps.
Flask extensions.
Yeah,
Now that sounds like something worth exploring.
absolutely. That's where we'll head next. Buckle up. So we were talking about the power of Flask extensions, remember?
Oh yeah, Flask extensions,
Yeah.
like adding superpowers to our apps.
Exactly. Like, let's say you want to build in user authentication,
Okay, yeah.
handling logins, passwords, all that stuff.
Not my favorite part, to be honest.
Well, there's an extension for that, Flask Login.
Flask login. Okay, so it handles all the security stuff for us.
Pretty much. It
And-
takes care of all those complex details like user sessions, logins, logouts.
So I don't have to write all that code from scratch.
Nope. You just tell it how to load users from your database, how to verify their credentials, and it handles the rest.
So it's like a pre-built security module that I can just plug into my app.
Exactly. Huge time saver, right?
Absolutely. Okay, but what about storing data? Like user profiles, product information?
You're going to need a database for that.
Right, of course. Does Flask make that easy too?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's another great extension called Flask School Alchemy.
Flask Squalchemy.
Yep, works with School Alchemy, which is a powerful Python ORM.
Okay, hold on. ORM, what's that?
Sorry, jargon alert. ORM stands for Object Relational Mapper.
Object relational mapper.
Yeah, basically it lets you work with your database using Python objects.
Instead of writing SQL queries directly.
Exactly. It's like having a translator between your code and the database.
Makes it much more readable, I bet.
Oh, yeah. Way more intuitive. With Flask Alchemy, you define your database models as Python classes.
Okay.
And then you can easily create, read, update, and delete data using those classes.
So it's like I'm manipulating Python objects.
Right.
But behind the scenes, Flask's Alchemy is doing all the database stuff for me.
Exactly. Pretty slick.
Very slick. Okay, so we've got user authentication, data storage, check and check.
But what about building APIs?
APIs. Yeah, those are essential these days.
Gotta let different applications talk to each other.
Absolutely. And Flask makes that super easy.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. It has built-in JSON support.
So when I return data from a Flask view function.
It automatically gets converted to JSON.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ready for other apps to use.
You got it. No need for any extra libraries.
Yeah,
or anything.
no, that's awesome. But I'm guessing there are extensions that can add even more API features, right?
You're always one step ahead.
Well, you know me.
There are specialized extensions like Flask RESTful and Flask REST Plus.
Okay, and those help with what exactly?
They give you more structure, more features, specifically for building really robust, well-documented APIs.
So Flask provides the foundation.
A solid base.
And then I can use extensions to customize it, enhance it, make it do exactly what I need. It's like building with Legos. You got the basic blocks, and then you can add all sorts of cool stuff on top.
I love that analogy. Okay, so we've talked about extensions for authentication, database, APIs.
A whole lot of power there.
But you mentioned WSGI earlier when we were talking about setting up a project.
Right, the web server gateway interface.
Does WSGI play a role in extending Flask apps too?
You bet. WSGI middleware is a powerful way to add functionality that wraps around your entire application.
Okay, so it's not specific to a particular feature, like authentication or database.
Nope. It's more like a global layer.
Can you give me some examples of what WSGI middleware can do?
Sure. You can use it to handle cross-origin requests, add security headers, or even integrate with third-party services.
So it's like a series of filters
Good way to put it.
that can modify requests or responses as they pass through my app.
Exactly. Really flexible and powerful.
So I can enhance my app without changing its core code directly. This deep dive has been so insightful. We've gone from the basics to these more advanced concepts like extensions, APIs, WSGI middleware.
We've covered a lot of ground,
I feel like I have a much better understanding of what Flask can do.
and there's still more to explore.
Oh yeah, there's always more to learn.
The Flask community is huge. They're always creating new extensions, sharing best practices.
It's amazing how active and supportive the open source community is.
Absolutely. It's one of the best things about working with tools like Flask.
Okay, but before we get carried away,
Sure.
there's one big thing we haven't talked about yet.
Let's hear it.
Deployment. How do we actually get our awesome Flask apps out into the world?
Duh, the grand finale. You're right. Deployment is crucial. And there are different ways to do it.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Well, one common approach is to use a WSGI server.
WSGI, right? That interface we talked about earlier.
Yep. So there are servers like Gunicorn or UWSGI that implement WSGI,
Okay.
and they basically act as a bridge between your Flask app and the web server.
Handling all the communication, making sure everything runs smoothly.
Precisely. They take care of all those low-level details.
So they're like interpreters,
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
translating between the language of our app and the language of the web server.
Exactly. They handle receiving requests, forwarding them to your Flask app, sending back responses.
Got it. And what about Nginx?
Nginx often comes into play as a reverse proxy.
Reverse proxy. Okay, remind me what that means.
Sure, so it sits in front of your WSGI server,
Okay.
and it can handle things like serving static files, load balancing, SSL termination for secure connections.
So it's like the traffic cop.
Yeah, I like that. Directing traffic, keeping everything flowing smoothly.
We're keeping things secure.
Absolutely. Security is always important.
Okay, so we've got the WSGI server, the reverse proxy.
Right.
But what about those cloud platforms like Heroku, AWS, Google Cloud?
The cloud. Those are definitely popular options for deploying Flask apps these days.
So instead of managing my own servers.
You can leverage the power of the cloud.
Exactly. What are the advantages of going that route?
Well, cloud platforms offer a whole range of services that make deployment a lot easier.
Like what?
They handle server provisioning, environment configuration. They can even automatically scale your app based on demand.
So if my app suddenly gets a surge of traffic,
The cloud can handle it. No sweat.
wow, that's pretty impressive. Are there any downsides to using the cloud?
Well, you do give up some control over your server environment.
Right, I guess that makes sense. So it's a trade-off.
Exactly. Convenience versus control.
So how do I choose the right deployment method? It sounds like there are a lot of factors to consider.
Yeah, it really depends on your specific needs, your budget, your comfort level with server management.
If I'm just starting out, maybe a platform like Heroku is a good choice.
Yeah, Heroku's great for simplicity and ease of use.
And if I need more control, maybe I go with a more traditional approach with dedicated servers.
Or even a custom cloud setup, yeah.
So many options. It's exciting, but also a bit overwhelming.
Well, that's the world of software development for you. Always evolving, always something new to learn.
That's what keeps it interesting.
Absolutely.
Wow, this deep dive into Flask has been amazing. We've covered so much ground, from the basics to advanced concepts, even deployment.
It's been a pleasure sharing this journey with you.
I feel like I have a really solid understanding of Flask now.
And remember, the learning never stops. There's always more to explore in the Flask ecosystem.
To our listener out there, if you're looking for a powerful, flexible framework for building web applications, Flask is definitely worth checking out.
You won't regret it. And don't forget the Flask community.
Right. They're super helpful and supportive.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to reach out if you need help or want to share your Flask creations with the world.
Happy coding, everyone.